This drawstring bag has a French seam that goes around the corner, so your print stays right side up on both sides, making it perfect for directional fabrics. Since this drawstring bag is fat quarter friendly, I'm going to take a fat quarter and fold it in half. Then I'm going to cut a 17.5 centimeters or 7-inch wide strip, and as you can see, I could fit 2 more bags on this leftover piece of fat quarter. You'll have a strip left, but you might need to trim the fat quarter, and it's always nice to have some margin. Now you could turn this long strip into a drawstring bag, but then one side of the fabric would be upside down, and since this fabric is directional, we're going to cut it in half. Now you should have 2 pieces of fabric that measure 17.5 centimeters by 22.5 centimeters or 7 by 9 inches. Take one of those pieces and prepare the tunnel. There's a 1 centimeter seam allowance or 3/8 of an inch, and the tunnel height is 2 centimeters or 3/4 of an inch. You can mark the fabric where you need to fold, but in this case I'm going to add guidelines for pressing. Measuring from the top edge, I'll draw a line at 2 centimeters or 3/4 of an inch and at 5 centimeters or 2 inches. Then make 2 centimeters or 3/4 of an inch marks along that 5 centimeter line and on the side. And then I'll draw a diagonal line between those 2 points. And this is where I'm going to cut the fabric. And then repeat these steps for the other side of the bag. And then we're going to fold over and press the little flap you just created by making those cuts. The edge of that fold is what's going to be the tunnel opening. And when we press that flap, we're going to offset it slightly. And by folding it on a slight diagonal, we're going to reduce the amount of bulk that's going to be on the tunnel opening, but it's also going to tuck in the back of the tunnel nicely behind the front of the tunnel. And the first fold will be the seam allowance towards the inside of the bag. And because I previously made that pressing guide, I can easily fold it at 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch. The second fold will create the tunnel and encase the seam allowance, and we're folding it against that second line that I drew at 5 centimeters or 2 inch. Then flip the project over to the right side of the fabric and press the little points towards the front of the bag. And then repeat these steps on the other piece of fabric. So working on the inside of the bag, fold in those little flaps on a slight diagonal and press. Then take the raw edge of the fabric and fold it against that line. Give it a good press and then fold over the edge towards that other folded line to create the tunnel. Then flip the project over to the right side of the fabric and fold and press the points towards the outside of the bag. And after pressing both pieces of fabric, the top and the tunnel should now look something like this. First, we're going to secure the edge of the tunnel, working from the inside of the bag. So close to the edge and repeat the step on the other side. I like to align the folded edge of the tunnel to the gap of my presser foot and then slightly offset my needle to the right. And try to sew all the way to the end of the tunnel. And repeat this step on the other side. Next, we're going to sew the first line of stitches for the French seam. Start by laying the two pieces of the bag on top of each other with the right side of the fabric facing out. So basically, the pretty side of the fabric should be facing you. And when you're doing a French seam, it can be helpful to mark the stitch line in the corners. And you might see that on the left the fabric doesn't completely align, but as long as the tunnel is aligned as best as you can, that's more important. Now stitch at 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch from the raw edge of the sides and the bottom. As you reach the corners, take your time, use the hand wheel to reach the corner if you need to, then leave the needle down in the fabric and pivot your work. Now, you don't need perfection, but for French seams it does pay off to take your time and do the best you can on those corners. After that first line of stitches, you're going to trim all around the edge that you just sewed, and you want to trim the seam allowance by about half. You don't need to measure this, you can just eyeball it, but it's really necessary for a French seam because all those stray threads poking out the sides are otherwise going to show up on the outside of the bag once you've done your second pass for the French seam. After you've trimmed all around the edges, we're going to clip the corners to reduce bulk. And then we're going to turn the bag inside out, poke out the corners and give it a good press. To press the seams exactly on the stitch line, it can help to roll the fabric between your fingers or roll it onto the ironing board. But whatever you do, take your time because this step is really important for a French seam. After pressing, you're ready to sew, and all those raw edges will be nicely encased within the French seam. And again, it can be really helpful to mark those corners, or if you're less confident, you can even mark the entire stitch line at 1 centimeter from that folded edge. And remember that for this last line of stitches, you should be looking at the wrong side of the fabric. We're going to sew 1 centimeter from the folded edge or 3/8 of an inch. The French seam is now all done, so it's time to turn the bag right side out, but there's a little trick for the corners. Even though we clip the corners, there's still quite a bit of bulk. So we're going to fold the seam allowance on top of each other and hold it while you turn the bag. So I reach inside with my thumb or index finger, fold the seam allowances on top of each other and then turn. Now you still might need to use something pointy and assist that corner to become nice and crisp, but this does prevent you from stuffing all that excess seam allowance in that corner. Even though I trimmed my seam allowances in that first step of the French seam, I still have a couple of stray threads poking out the seam allowance, and sometimes you can just pull them out, but in this case I needed to cut them off. Now you can give the bag a final press and add the drawstrings. I used 3mm thick cotton cord. And I cut two 44 centimeter pieces or two 17.5-inch pieces. You can use a safety pin to insert the drawstring cord. I like to use my Prim loop turner for this, but it's not necessary. However, it does have a big advantage over the safety pin because sometimes the safety pins will open while they're in the tunnel if you're not careful, and you can stick yourself and you can get them stuck. Both I've had happen, so that's why I really like my loop turner. After inserting the drawstring pieces in opposite directions, add a couple of knots and your bag is finished.